Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Dadhood podcast. We are now on episode 33, I believe. So, if you have been following us in this journey of these kind of 33 episodes, then thank you very much for staying on that journey. And if you're new to this and the first time that you're watching it, then make sure you do follow us and subscribe to wherever you're listening to this, whether it's YouTube or the podcast apps. And you can also find me on Instagram at Shoaib Muhammad, where I do a lot of other dad related content as well. And before we get into the guest, just a quick shout out to Building Blocks Nursery, which is the nursery that my children attend. They've been kind of helping me out, sponsoring some of the content and the episodes. And I've really, really, been happy and proud of my children and their development at that nursery. So if you guys live in the same area as me, which is kind of the Watford, Hertfordshire area, then definitely consider them if you're looking for a place for a nursery for your children. But even if you don't live there, give them a follow. They have a lot of good content on nurseries, how they run, the type of things to cover, the syllabus. Even if you're homeschooling, it's actually pretty good. You get quite a few good ideas from there. So I definitely recommend you following them. You can find the links in the description. So let's get started with the episode. So today we have Omar Dacosta, who is, mashallah, quite an interesting individual. And the reason why we reached out is because I've been following Omar's work for quite a while when it comes to the Muslim Influencers Network. And he also has something called Mvslim, which is a media distribution website company. And I've always just been following those things, being in the Muslim space myself, being in the media space myself. And then I saw 6 months ago he had a child. So I thought, why not reach out, bring him on and see what his experience has been like. So Omar, welcome to the podcast. And the first question that we always ask our guests is, how old were you when you became a father? And how many children do you have? Well, the second one, I've kind of already answered that, but yeah.
Yeah. So I was 30. I had to think about that one. Yeah, I was 30, and I've got one child who's 6 months, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So, in being 30 years old and then having your first child, was that something that you thought, okay, by the time I'm 30, I'm definitely going to be a father? Or was it kind of just, things have gone with the flow?
In all honesty, we didn't. Me and my wife, we didn't expect to wait that long. So when I got married, we were like, inshallah, we'll give it a couple of years, then we'll start having children. After 2 years, we'll give it another couple of years, and after 2 years later, another couple of years, and it just got delayed and delayed and delayed. So alhamdulillah, we've been married for coming up to, I think, 8 years. 8 years. So it was about time, alhamdulillah. Everything happens at the right time and for the right reason. So perhaps, we weren't ready as parents, before that. That's one of the things that in life generally, not just when it comes to children, that, Allah's timing is the right timing. So whenever something happens, is the right time for you.
Yeah, definitely. You were sharing on Facebook and LinkedIn some of your reflections about sort of becoming a father, and you usually do have some reflections about your business and relationships that you've built through sort of business connections and the way the things that you've learned from maybe failed businesses or any networks that you've been part of. So what were some of those reflections, because maybe some people haven't been following you, that you were sharing? You had a picture of you holding your baby and you had nice little reflections on there. Do you want to just go through a couple of them?
Yeah. I'll try and pick out some of them from what I remember. So the first was around the idea of, I really believe that fathers need to take seriously the idea of paternity leave. And the reason for that is, mothers, our wives, they go through immense struggle. Their lives are pretty much turned upside down. Their freedom is stripped away. They often suffer from mental health issues. Postnatal depression is very common. So because of that, I think if there's a large responsibility on the husband, on the father, to really be there, to step up for the sake of the family. And I just think that in most instances, 2 weeks just doesn't cut it. because 2 weeks is hardly enough to do anything, and then you're back to work. It's very difficult for people in certain professions, like if you're, a doctor, or, especially if you are employed, you don't generally have that same level of flexibility. Although that you do have shared, kind of paternity, maternity leave that you can speak to your work about. Not every place, I think, is open to that, but I would encourage every father to know the struggles that you're going to go through as a family, and that your wife is going to endure, and therefore really taking seriously the idea of taking time off to be there, not just for your child, but for your wife's emotional well-being, is extremely important. I took off 8 weeks, and 8 weeks even really isn't enough. I mean, really, like, you need to take off like the entire whole year, the first
Yeah,
year, really.
subhanallah.
That's how much support your wife needs. That's one element. The second element, and I think I'll just choose this one, and then
Yeah, yeah,
maybe we'll move on to the next thing. But is the idea that during my paternity anyway, I really had time to take stock and reflect about life, and what I want, and so on. And there were certain decisions that I made that I thought were really important, for myself, and for my family. Um, you know, and often there's things that we know in life, but we just don't get the chance to really think about them deeply and internalize them and action them. And just to give a relatively small example, though I think it's an important example, is during my paternity, I gave up eating chicken. And the reason for that is because throughout most of my adult life, I knew, the conditions that animals, in the modern world are raised in.
yeah,
The Quran is very clear. It says our food should be halal and tayyib.
yeah,
Halal meaning legally permissible,
yeah,
and tayyib meaning pure, wholesome, organic. It's more the kind of, I suppose, less legalistic component,
yeah.
and more the spiritual component. And I was reading a side point. I was reading an article yesterday by Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, not the
Yeah.
MB guy, but
The contemporary one.
our sheikh in London,
Yeah,
from London,
yeah,
or the UK, and he was talking about how something can be halal, but it can be un-Islamic. So for me, that's one of the things that I did, is I stopped eating chicken. And if it's organic chicken, alhamdulillah, that's what Muslims should be aspiring
right.
to eat, if we can afford it, of course. And as of yesterday, I made an even bigger commitment beyond chicken, which I'm not going to mention yet, because if in case I fail, I'm not going to. I don't want to show myself up. But that's just one example of having the time to reflect and then actually action something in your life.
Okay, alhamdulillah. I think the point about paternity, I definitely felt that. When I took paternity, again, it was just the 2 weeks, the minimum period that you get, and I was straight back to work, and I felt like I was letting my wife down because I wasn't able to be there to support her fully. But I also felt like I was letting my son down as well. Because I should be able to build a bond with him too. Of course, the mothers are going to be a lot more involved, especially if there's breastfeeding and things like this. Then most of the time it's going to be spent with the mother, but that period also does need a bit of bonding between the father and the child to build those kind of relationships emotionally. Um, and then when my daughter came along, the difference was that it was in lockdown, so that meant that I had to be at home anyway, and I wasn't leaving the home anyway. So having that, yes, had time the 2 weeks off again, but then I was still there. I wasn't going back to the office. Yeah, I was less available because I was at my desk doing some work, but I could still be around and help out, especially with the second child. Making sure to keep sorry, with the first child, Isa, keeping him away from mom and the new baby and things like that. So I think you're right. Like, there needs to be a lot more thought given by employers and the government when it comes to policies on paternity. It is really, really important, and I feel like a lot of fathers do end up missing out, and they kind of just grit their teeth and kind of get along with it. Where they sometimes in the back of their minds they wish that they could have stayed longer during this period where their family is just starting up, and they want to get their hands dirty, you could say. And sometimes they just grit their teeth and get along with it, get back to work. So, oh well, this is just the situation. And there's so many benefits to having both parents around the new baby. I can't list off the top of my head, but maybe people can add them in the comments when they're listening back to this. But there's just a list of huge benefits for the mental health of the wife, for the development of the baby, even for the father himself. Mentally, he can feel like he's actually involved and not feel so distant. I've heard so many stories of fathers who feel like they're not really fathers in that first year or even first 2 years. It's only once the child is a bit more independent and talking and things like this where they feel like they can actually come into the picture, even if they've been trying. So I think having more time around can definitely help all parties. So just going back a little bit, you've only been in the game for 6 months, so obviously I'm not going to ask you some crazy parenting advice. I'm sure you could give some good tips, but where I do want you to share your experience is sometimes for fathers, even at my stage where I've got a 4-year-old and 2-year-old, sometimes you even forget what it's like, the pregnancy and leading up to the birth, and then the labor itself and those first couple of months. Sometimes you forget that, and you can't always then share that advice with others. I have a lot of brothers that come to me and they say, can my wife's pregnant, give me a bit of advice. And sometimes I forget, okay, what did I really do then, or what was I doing to take care of my wife, or what was the experience really like? So I think that's why it's important to bring people like yourself onto the podcast to share some of that. So can you take us through a little bit of the journey of what the pregnancy may have been like, and what were, as well, and maybe any tips that you can share with dads who their wives are pregnant, and maybe something that you learned that maybe you didn't do, or something you did quite well that could help them in that journey.
So first thing is that pregnancy is different for everybody. Some women have it a lot harder than others, and I think that's just important to know that sometimes you just don't know how the pregnancy is going to be. So maybe prepare for the worst in some sense. And it's important, we talked about not just paternity, but even during the pregnancy, your wife needs you, emotionally and physically and so on, especially towards the end of the pregnancy. It become even more difficult for the mothers. They get more tired just walking, they need more help and so on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, alhamdulillah, our pregnancy, my wife's pregnancy was pretty smooth. Alhamdulillah, we didn't really have too many issues. But I didn't expect actually, all the kind of checkups that you have to go to the hospital. I'm wondering whether when you have your second or third child, whether parents still go for as many checkups, because it's kind of like you're used to it. You don't necessarily feel like you need to go to as many. I don't know. But that's one thing, is you're going to need to book time off work, because there's probably at least, I don't know, 4 to 5 checkups throughout those 9 months. So you have to maybe book half days off or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, I would say it's really important for you to encourage your wife to start thinking about prenatal supplements and things like that. And it's very difficult, because our wives don't always want to eat the most healthy when they're pregnant. They have certain cravings and so on. But at the same time, do encourage them to eat as well as they can do, because I'm pretty sure that, the way your wife eats during pregnancy will not only have an impact maybe on her mood and emotional well-being and so on, but also it may impact your baby. The food that we eat is the building block of our bodies and what happens inside our body and so on. So obviously you don't want to be too strict, you don't want to be too regimented, you want to give your, not be too sometimes my wife says I'm a bit too regimented with things, but at the same time you want to have that balance. Make sure you're thinking about, because when your wife is pregnant, she's often depleted of certain nutrients and so on, because a lot of it's going to the baby. So you want to make sure that those are replaced, and then even post-birth you want to make sure that they're still having supplements and very nutritionally dense food to recover and so on. So I don't think I quite answered your question. I think you asked about one good thing and one bad thing, if I'm not
Yeah, it's
mistaken.
like
That yeah.
I think you're going in the direction. There's a couple of tips there basically for dads whose wives are pregnant. So you've pretty much covered it. And like you said, there weren't too many complications that you did have to deal with. So I did ask that as well, if, how the journey was. So it seems like alhamdulillah it was pretty smooth. It's good to know some of those tips actually. And to be honest, even me, I didn't think about those while my wife was pregnant, because again, for every father, it's going to be the first time new experience. It's only sort of once you've gone through it and you look back at it, you're like, maybe I could have done this and I could have done that. And also, it's actually good to learn from newer fathers, because they may have knowledge that's been passed down to them. And so you can actually implement that maybe in the next time that your wife falls pregnant. So now I have that noted down in terms of the nutrients and things like that. Alhamdulillah. Um, uh, during that sort of labor period, did was there anything that you felt like, other than the checkup appointments, which is good? It's good that you brought that up because you have to book time off work. But was there anything that you felt like was so unexpected about the pregnancy itself? So not kind of the surroundings, but just the way that certain things develop. First trimester, second trimester, third trimester. Was there anything quite surprising for you?
Mm. Um, Short answer is no. Although I'll tell you some thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah.
The first thing is, I was actually pleasantly surprised and happy that my wife actually trained at the gym up until literally the day before she gave birth.
Wow, subhanallah.
So I actually bought her, not bought, I maybe bought her is not the right word, but I paid for personal training for her throughout her entire pregnancy. And I think that probably was a contributing factor towards maybe why the pregnancy was relatively smooth.
Right.
So I think you have to, of course, get advice, and you have to speak with your GP and speak with professional if you're going to exercise during pregnancy, and you want to make sure that you are exercising appropriately in line with being pregnant. So I think that was really important, and I was really happy that my wife was able to do that. The second thing is, there were things that, unless your wife's been pregnant before, you're not going to know, certain what's going to happen, during the checkups and so on. For example, one thing I wasn't aware of was towards the end of the pregnancy, they offered certain vaccines to my wife, to immunize the child, things like whooping cough vaccine and so on. So I'm actually quite. I actually believe we all need to do research when it comes to any vaccine.
Yeah.
Because vaccines, some of them are old vaccines, in which generally they're more safe because they've been tried and tested.
Yeah.
If they're more novel vaccines and they haven't been out long, then I would definitely do more research on them to see what type of side effects they can have on the mother, what type of side effects they can have on the child, and so on. So, towards the end of the pregnancy, there was one or two vaccines that, while we're in the hospital, they said, we're going to give this to your wife now. And I was like, whoa, like I wasn't even prepared. I haven't done any research and so on. So I would encourage fathers to ask other fathers or other parents, what are the steps that happen during pregnancy? What weren't you prepared for that I can be prepared for?
Yeah.
And the vaccine stuff is just one small example. So yeah, I think you want to be as prepared as possible, and you want to be able to think ahead. And finally, and again, I actually have no idea what question you asked me, but I'm just rambling on now.
Maybe that's my fault. I'm not being very clear, am I?
No, it's I get lost in my own thoughts sometimes. But the last thing is, I think it's really important that both parents, both mother and father, do as much research generally around pregnancy, around labor, around birth, as possible. And the reason for that is, for example, when your wife is given labor, where do you want the labor to be? Do you want it to be in a birthing center? Do you just want it to be in a hospital? What type of birth do you want it to be? Do you want it to be a water birth and so on? There's definitely benefits to some, labor techniques compared to others. So, and even you want to think about once your child is born, you want to think about, um, what type of sleeping techniques do you want to employ? For example, most parents, 90% plus, I would say, go through sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
During
Yeah.
the first year, it's very very normal. But there are ways to combat that. There are some parents who don't necessarily have the requisite knowledge to know how to combat when your baby isn't sleeping well. But there are techniques that you can do that can help with that. But a lot of parents are unprepared for things like that. You know, Again, on the vaccine side, I read 4 books. I read articles, and I spoke with experts before I made the decision around what vaccines are necessary for
Right.
my son and not. And I think all human beings, especially Muslims, we need to understand that we live in a world where not everything is as it seems.
Yeah.
We need to know that there is propaganda, there are interests, there are big corporations who employ staff to make things look a certain way. They can push things up Google, they can move things down Google. They can lobby, they can tarnish people's reputations who speak against them. We don't live in a world which everything that we see is necessarily true.
Yeah.
And therefore, whether it's vaccines, whether it's the food industry, anything, we need to make sure that we are researched, we are critical, we are thorough, because we are dealing with the next generation of society. We're dealing with our children. What do you want to put in your child's body? Are you
Yeah.
happy to
Yeah.
put stuff in your child's body that you don't even know what it is? You just been told you're supposed to, and you're going along with it.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why certain illnesses are becoming more prevalent and so on. I'm not here to criticize vaccines. I'm
Yeah.
not here to criticize certain food. I'm saying that make sure we do our research, because some things are perfectly fine and other things are less tested. And we need to know what has been rigorously scientifically tested and has been out for a long time. Where is there interest by corporations, food corporations, and so on. And otherwise, we'll forever be at the mercy of people in power who don't necessarily have our interests at heart, but they have profit and revenue at the center of everything,
Yeah.
which is not an Islamic worldview.
Jazakallah khair. He brought up some really, really good points, and it's got me thinking that there are kind of these multiple steps that we need to be going through when it comes to looking at the pregnancy as a whole. Prior to the pregnancy, doing all that research, like you said, because there's so many things that I didn't even know. For example, the different types of births. Right, I didn't know you could do like hypnobirthing. I didn't know you could do a water birth, home birth. I thought was like, you know, oh, people don't do that anymore. Like that's just like last minute option type thing. It doesn't really happen. Everybody goes to the hospital, and you find that actually home births are so common, and a lot of people actually choose it, and then the hospitals and everything like that are actually quite accommodating. So I think definitely like going through this process of research is super important. In the pregnancy itself, knowing when those checkups happen, what happens at each one, when you what is each one looking for? Is it looking for a heartbeat? It's looking for the development of the fetus. It's looking at the gender. All these kind of things. And it's sort of tracking the development. So I think knowing some of that stuff would be quite good. And then, like you said, post birth as well, or even actually during the labor, there's things like inducing that can happen where the baby's not coming out, so it needs to be induced, and all the different methods of that induction. You also have the type of room that you can get in the hospital too, if you're lucky enough to have that type of option. But there are some hospitals that can offer that type of option. And then there's also I didn't even know the whole post-pregnancy thing. I thought, okay, give birth, they're going to do a couple of checks and we're going to go home. And then they're telling my wife has to stay behind, the baby has to stay behind. I have to leave. I have to come get them tomorrow because they need to continue doing checks. and my wife needs to rest. Um, and there could be, obviously, within the labor, there can be certain complications, in terms of the way that the baby comes out. Is it going to be a C-section? Is it going to be a normal birth? And whether that's going to have an impact on the mother's health as well, and maybe certain procedures that need to happen to help the mother with her health. And then, like you said, when they come home, sleep, food, and just the time that you have as a dad with the family and what you need to help with. So I think all of these kind of points are like very, very important that you've brought up. And you rightly said that it'll be good for new fathers, or those who are about to become fathers, to speak to fathers who have been through all of this, and they can hopefully break this down and give you some information, as well as just doing your own research. I mean, you said you read like 4 books about vaccines and a few articles and speaking to experts. So, definitely go ahead and do that, and get a good understanding of what you're about to get into. And I think, putting that all together, the reason why I'm sort of putting so much emphasis on it is because this is your child at the end of the day. This is you bringing somebody into this world. This is you. This is the woman that you married and decided to have children with her. This is about supporting her. And what could be, there's not many things that are more important than getting all of this right. That doesn't mean I don't want to put people off where, to such an extent, where they feel like it's too complicated, that they get scared, or they feel like they're failing, even maybe they're halfway through this whole process, or they've done this process and they're looking back, they're like, wow, I failed. Allah obviously watches over us and helps people get through all of this stuff, alhamdulillah, quite easy and quite well. So I don't think you should feel afraid of all of this, the fact that we're listing things out, but it's good to be aware of it so you can be as prepared as possible. And I think if I like had a plan for this podcast, I mean, it was meant to be just a discussion, but I would have just gone through every single part with you, and maybe you could have broken it down or something. And that's something maybe, inshallah, we'll try and do at a later point. And just touching upon what you said about, just being wary about what world that we're bringing our children into, I think is important. We shouldn't, as fathers who are given the responsibility of leading the family, shouldn't just kind of, you know, be so clueless about processes like this. Sometimes we feel like this is down to the mother to know, or down to the mother to research, and she'll take care of the whole kind of first few years. But you have responsibility. This is your flock. You're the leader of this flock, and you need to make sure that you're guiding things the right direction. That doesn't mean that your wife is doing nothing, but it's your support that your wife will need at this time, especially after she's gone through something as amazing, but also as complicated as labor. So definitely that should step up to the plate when it comes to some of this stuff. Just another question for you. Could you touch a little bit upon returning home with a baby and how those first kind of couple of weeks were? What were the kind of things how did you expect it was going to be like, and how did it really turn out?
So I think it was a relief to be back home, because the labor itself was very, very difficult. I just remember when I saw my son for the first time, I just burst out in tears. I think it was a mix of like the complications in the labor itself and the difficulty of the labor, and then just the pure happiness as well. And then we came home. My wife was in hospital for, I think, another day or so after the labor. And then we came home. Alhamdulillah, we have the support of my in-laws as well. So we stayed there, I think, the first 8 weeks. And that's one thing I would definitely recommend to parents, is think about what support network you have and how you can get them involved in the early stages where you need that support. Raising a child is not just for a mother. It's not even just for mother and father. You actually need multiple people to help you raise a child. So we had that support. I think being at my in-laws helped, because the labor was so difficult. My wife needed long time for recovery.
Yeah.
So I actually had to step up and do a lot of stuff that I don't normally do, in the house, looking after the house and, other menial things which maybe I don't normally do, or going out and getting stuff
Yeah.
more often and so on, because my wife was unable to do the stuff that she normally is able to do. So one thing I would recommend is, you want to understand what limitations your wife has in those first, few weeks, and then think about, what can you do above and beyond what you normally do, and create a plan. One of the things I did actually was I had a daily checklist.
Okay.
What do I need to do on a daily basis? I need to. We have a cat as well, so I need to, change her. I need to change her litter
So
tray. I need
you've
to
had some
feed.
training before the baby then.
Yeah, a little bit, little bit. Like taking the cat on a walk. Like my wife would normally do that, for example.
Yeah.
Taking the cat for a walk. You know, for example, making sure that my wife, has is supported, throughout the day, and
Hmm.
what things she might need throughout the day, and so on. So yeah, I think just as a practical tip, I would say create a checklist for every day what you need to do, and that way, and maybe even have a shared checklist with your wife, so
Mm.
she knows what you're doing that day, and you can tick it off, and so on. So think practically about what you can do, the support that you need, and also know that there's a solution for everything. Sometimes there are things that appear very, very difficult,
Yeah.
but you just need to think a little bit harder and a bit wider. Think about who's in your network and who can support you. And inshallah, you will find solutions to things. Don't think you have to suffer just because that's the way it is.
Yeah.
No, you actually can get help. You actually can resolve things. You can find solutions.
That's a very good point. Definitely do reach out. There is a couple of brothers at the moment that their wives are pregnant, and I try and do my best just to call the brothers and just ask them how's everything going. Is there anything that you're confused about? Anything that you need? Because I know that sometimes with the brothers, just generally as men, we don't want to speak about some of these experiences. We don't want to, if we're finding something hard, it's kind of, it's just, I'm the husband, I'm the man, and I'll kind of get along with it. And which is obviously a good characteristic to have and can help. But at the same time, try to share some of those difficulties with your friends and your brothers around you. They may be able to help you, especially those who have some of the experiences. And so I do my best to reach out and just to ask if there's any confusion, anything that they need help with. And by the way, I had the same experience as you in terms of having that support network. I think that's super important. So we were actually living um, in the middle between my family and my wife's family. We were living in a town in the middle, which was like a good hour away from each of them. We thought that was a good middle ground. And it was a good middle ground from when we had our first child. But then when you've got the second one, you do need a lot more support, or at least we did. And so it's either we move closer to my wife's family or we move closer to my family. And it kind of just made sense to move closer to my family. It was more, was within London, work was there and things like that. And my family are able to support us through many of the things, like my mom would be happy to take the elder child and let him sleep over at hers and things like that, and do the normal grandma things that grandmas do. So it was very, very good for us in that sense. So my wife was able to have that support during the second pregnancy, and we knew that, okay, once the baby is here, we're going to have to try and divide our time between the two children. So knowing that there's a support network around, family members are only a few minutes away, we can have that support network. So definitely, if you haven't thought about what the experience is going to be like post birth, just know that it doesn't have to be like super difficult, but with anything new in your life, you're going to want people around you that you can rely upon when things get hard. So definitely think about where you're living, or what access you have to friends or to family that can definitely help you. You mentioned checklists and to-do lists, and you know previous generation maybe listening to this would be like, what are you doing, bro? Like, why do you need a checklist with your wife? Like, you just get things done, okay? And I feel like our generation are very much like, let's kind of do the to-do list and the checklist and things like this. And I'm like that. Me and my wife are like that. Always making plans, always making routines, always trying to plan things out and structure things out. So did you and your wife have like a plan of how things were gonna go like through the pregnancy? Like, you said you did a lot of research. Was it like you and your wife sitting down, ticking things off, like, okay, we're gonna do this like this, we're gonna get this thing ready, we're gonna do this, and then when we come back from the hospital, like the process is gonna be like this? Did you guys have that sort of conversation, or was it more just learning as things go?
So my wife did a lot of reading with regards to pregnancy and postnatal once you're giving birth and
Yeah.
so on, what happens. And so there was a lot of research done, I think, from both of our sides, much more from her side actually.
Okay.
She read countless books, ebooks. She got me to read ebooks and so on, even about like, there was this acronym of like, when you're putting a baby to sleep, like S for shushing, P for patting, whatever it was. So there was all this stuff that I was asked to read, which was really helpful. And I think just generally, look, the more informed you are, the better. And I think there's also another argument that you can be kind of a bit laid back and just go with the flow, which sometimes that works for people as well. But I think it depends what type of person you are.
Sure.
If you want to be more prepared or you don't mind. So in short, we didn't necessarily have like actual plans,
Sure.
but we just tried to make sure that we were researched and we understood what was going to happen, what could happen. My wife made a labor plan. What do you call it?
Yeah.
Birth plan.
Birth plan. Yeah.
She made that quite very, very early on, and she was very, very specific with what she
Okay.
wanted. And that's one thing that I would encourage parents to really think about birth plan, but also know that it may go completely out the window.
Okay.
How we wanted the birth to go, it was a complete opposite.
Right.
Because you can't. There are certain factors that you can't just determine and are going to come your way. And then after birth, we didn't really have any. We just kind of learn week by week what we needed for our situation, and then just adapted based off of that.
Okay. What was it in the process of the birth plan that maybe surprised you, or made you feel like, oh, yeah, I never thought we had to think about this?
So yeah, I mean, I wasn't too familiar with the idea of a birth plan, just before pregnancy or whatever. Then my wife introduced me to it, and so on. But it's important that the mother has a birth plan,
Yeah.
and you should be familiar with that because, for example, if there are things that don't go to plan, for example, if it's not a vaginal birth, it's a C-section, then you need to know what could happen. And for example, if there's induction and various other things, you need to know the possibilities, and you also need to know what your wife would prefer.
Yeah.
And sometimes your wife is not in the mental state to make the right decision. So you need to have a discussion with your wife and say, okay, if X happens, what do we do? If Y happens, what do we do? And then the fathers also, you should think about, what do you want to take to the hospital? For example, like, if you have to stay there for 2 or 3 nights, then, make sure you change
Your
your
Nintendo
clothes
Switch
and
and
all of that stuff, all that good stuff. So yeah, there's multiple things to think about. So yeah,
okay.
try to be prepared.
Yeah. Birthing plans, another good one to tick off the list. I think if there's anybody who is a couple that are listening to this, you're thinking about having kids, or you're a dad, your husband and your wife is pregnant, I would say rewind through this episode, take a note of some of the various things that we've mentioned, and take them off as you're going along. Ask your wife, have you got a birthing plan? Should we make one? What are the types of pregnancies and births that can happen? What are the checkups? What are they going to be looking at? What's the development of the fetus? I think that was one thing. My wife had like an app that tells you sort of you put in the day that you conceived and your potential due date, and sort of just calculates, okay, and this week this should be happening to your baby, and tells you weird things like it's the size of a potato now, things like that. And it was good. It was good just to kind of keep a track of things. So again, that's another one. And post birth as well, what's going to happen, whether there's going to be any checks, the type of things that need to do. I remember I remember just changing a nappy for the first time, really. Like when the baby came out, there was like this really ugly black poo, and people don't tell you about this, but that's essentially what happens. It's very common that when the baby comes out, it's not going to be like a normal color, and your wife's going to be laying down resting. You're going to have to deal with this. So definitely, dad should be prepared with some of this stuff. There's obviously clothes and things that you need to bring for the new baby. So that's definitely something to think about and to remember. Hospital bags. Did you have like a whole thing with hospital bags?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to refer to. I couldn't remember the term, but it's hospital bag. Yeah, so a father should have his own hospital
Yeah,
bag
yeah,
ideally.
yeah.
Although a lot of fathers, I think, don't or they don't think about that. And then the wife's hospital bag will be probably 3 times the size.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I remember being told to make sure I bring a lot of snacks for my wife. She's gonna need a lot of energy at that time, clearly, because she's depleting a lot. And I was told by one of the like elder brothers in our community that treat it like a marathon. So have a lot of things at hand to keep up the energy of your wife as she's going along. Um, and I think one thing that was quite helpful is like playing some Quran. If you have like bring a little mini speaker or something like that, and you can kind of play that, if that can help to calm down some of the feelings or the tensions and things like this, and obviously maybe possibly bring some barakah into the birthing process and things like this.
The reason I'm smiling is because I remember I was telling my business partner about all the plans
Yeah,
that we had for the birth, and he's
yeah,
like, "Bro, you're not ready for what's about to happen." He's like, Just wait till you experience it. Then you like, then you will know what it's like." And it's I think only once you experience labor, then you really appreciate, wow, what an experience. That was
mm,
what a what a moment, and what a I mean, depending how long the labor takes, it can
yeah,
be more difficult and so on. Um, Especially the first child. The first child is often the longest labor.
yeah.
But yeah, fathers to be prepared. It's something. It's really something.
Definitely, I think it's definitely a special moment as well in the development of your relationship between you and your wife. It definitely kind of like sets a new standard and a new bar of like the level of that bond, and also for you as an individual. Going through life, it's obviously a milestone that you look back on, and you can sort of you know track your life as pre kids and post kids. It becomes like a very defining moment. So definitely something definitely to look forward to. Like, yeah, we're mentioning that there's all these things that you should look out for and research, but it's also a moment, and yes, it's going to be difficult, but it's just a moment to definitely look forward to. And I guess I could only say that after it's done. It's like, yeah, that was definitely good, but yeah, like you said, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be difficult. Um, so we're gonna come to an end now, and I just wanted to uh get your thoughts on these 6 months that you've had your baby in your life. You, as a father, do you have like this new sort of way that you see yourself and you see maybe your purpose in life? Is there like a new part of your life's vision that has come into your life in these 6 months since your baby has been here?
So I think just like any parent, there's the idea of there's a real sense of responsibility that you feel now. It's first it's just you, then it's you and your wife, and then it's your children. That kind of the obvious thing. But also think the idea of thinking ahead. Like for example, in 3 years' time, the metaverse will probably be in full flow.
Yeah,
Zuckerberg said we're 3 to 4 years away from the metaverse, really coming to life.
mm,
And what sort of implications is that going to have on our children?
mm,
That's just one example among many others. But we're going to live in a drastically different world, and as parents, we need to be switched on and
yeah,
thinking about where is the world heading,
yeah,
because that's the world our children are going to inherit, and that's the world that we're bringing our children up in, that we need to prepare them for.
mm,
So I think really thinking about what you as a parent can do to learn about these things that are happening. Even for example, things like gender fluidity and
Yeah,
various
yeah.
things like that, they're going to be taught to our children in school. And how do you navigate that? What sort of conversations do you want to have preemptively before those they hear them in the school? And we need to know what type of conversations they're going to have in school. We need to know what type of technology is going to be available to them, before they start to use it. Otherwise, they'll start using it without us even knowing. And by that time, sometimes it's too late to do anything about it. So really understand where our world is heading and learn about it. Otherwise, you can't really protect your children from it. Otherwise.
And very, very final thing. Any highlight in the last 6 months of being a father? Any one moment, maybe this week, last week, yesterday, that's happened that you feel like that's a good memory?
Um, it's very difficult because you'll know as a father, at every stage, like every month, there's a development.
Yeah,
Like the first time they laugh. The first time, like I remember the first time I saw my son like crawling on his stomach.
yeah,
And then now he's almost starting to crawl, and all of these are special moments, and even weaning for the first time, and so
yeah.
on. So I'm really sorry, bro. I can't give you one specific thing.
But you're enjoying the
But
process.
yeah, I think that's the thing, is try to be present throughout
Mm.
the whole thing. It's very difficult because our attention spans are so short, and we're thinking about so many different things. And I think one advice I'd give to myself and all of us is, when you're with your family, be with your family. When you're at work, be at work.
Yeah.
When you're worshiping Allah, worship Allah. Of course, we worship Allah all the
Yeah, yeah,
time,
yeah.
inshallah. But try to be present with your family. Give them your time, give them your attention, because they're, you know, your most valuable asset, really, in life. So no one ever really will say, "Oh, I should have worked more at the end of their life." They will say, I wish I spent more time with family." So spend time with your family.
Beautiful point to end on. Jazakallah khair. Omar, I really appreciate you coming on. And maybe in the future you'll accept our invite for another one. We can have an update, a few years down the line when your baby has grown. Maybe if there's been more members of the family, inshallah. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.